our province, I think it's about 3.5, 4 million people. There's 2,700 positives, or yeah, cases total, and of that, maybe 200 of those are active. And in Florida, they had 5,000 cases in one day. So
Yeah,
it's just
that was
staggering.
yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, so we're doing pretty good. I mean, I'm still wearing a mask when I go out. Like you could see the level of compliance around here, and we have 2,700 cases. Like 150 people have died. So it's and that those are maybe those are the same as flu numbers. I don't know, maybe even less. But it's certainly staggering seeing some of the numbers coming across. And I don't know how good the testing is. So that's one of the reasons I want to jump on was um, this idea that sports are having to test people. Is it just the simple fact that they have to test people as part of going back to a university, going back to a pro team? Now that we're actually going to start seeing the real numbers, or when one thing I'll say is that I talked to Rob and I posted this topic, and some people were actually angry that we're talking about this. It's just really bizarre now in terms of how the politics is entering into it. But just like you would suggest, hey, maybe you should wear a mask if you come into my store, people are like, I'm not going to your store because I have to wear a mask. And it's getting kind of crazy like that. So if we talk about, well, maybe sports should come back slower, or maybe we should be more careful about this, people get upset. So it's really bizarre right now. And I think, obviously I'm all for health and safety. But also, I want people like, I spoke to Rob about this, like, yeah, you want to get people back in the safest way possible to keep the economy running, but there doesn't seem to be any middle ground. It's either rip off your mask and like eat fast food in groups of like 30 or more, or it's, like, hey, just stay home and don't do anything. But there's no middle ground here. It's bizarre. So Keenan, not that you're outspoken, but I want you to comment on this first and say, like, even from a sporting point of view, like I saw an article, I can't remember where, but it said, like, are youth sports in danger? Like that they're not going to open, and kids are going to be missing these windows of opportunities. And so what do you do? Is there a possible middle ground here where we can keep people safe and get back to sports and the economy?
I think that there has to be a middle ground. I don't know what it is, but if any of you guys have ESPN alert on your phone, 15 minutes before we started this conversation, we just got the alert that another university had 11 positive tests, and it just is. We've just seen it, right? It started with Alabama and two other SEC schools
Clemson.
or 3 weeks ago when they brought it back. Well, Clemson, we just found out yesterday, right? They lost like 20% of their team day one to a positive test, and um, so but I do fear. I mean, my fear, like in the United States, is that sports that aren't famous in the United States, like taekwondo, like the combat acrobat sports, are just going to be gone. Like they'll never recover, because as a parent myself, right, it's the number one thing I want for my kids when we go back to sport is safety, right? So cross countries right now where I feel like they can go, just have them run up the incline and come back, they'll be fine. But but I think we're going to start seeing some stuff. Mike, as you said, we saw some stuff from the AFL. We'll continue to see the results from the Bundesliga, and as Major League Soccer opens up like next week, right, or 10 days. Because I want it to open, right? From the economical standpoint, and from I want it, but I just don't know. I don't have the capacity or wherewithal. I'm not an epidemiologist, and I'm not good at what's the word I'm looking for? Like graphs, like projective graphs. I don't know that. So, Derek, right? Like you guys have figured it out, obviously, in your province. And so if you just kind of micromanage that to sports, there's potentially a good opportunity.
Yeah, like I've seen stuff come across the email about like, hey, we're gonna open up this summer camp or this, and these are all the guidelines that they have around running that camp. Uh, this is how we're going to distance people. This is where we're going to have hand sanitizer. So at least as part of that initiative, there's guidelines, and people are very sensitive about it in terms of not offering something where it's just going to be a free for all. So, you know, and with the pro sports example, if do you get, let's again go back to Keenan. If do you think if they get more positives as part of this, say, NBA return to Disney World, is that going to reflect on the rest of sports? So if NBA, again, because that's how it started, right? Silver said we're going to not have any games because of this positive in Utah. And then everybody kind of followed after that. The NBA was kind of the leader. So the NBA says we're going to go to Orlando. 5 positives here. 10, you know, are they going to say nope? And then there's a trickle down effect of all sports saying, I guess we can't do it either. What do you think?
Well, that's the thing I do wonder about these things. So in our opening guidelines for the Olympic Training Center, we clearly say, like, step one, if you're sick, don't show up here. And so have all these cases, I think we're reaching well over 200, right? In terms of NC2A football, are they all asymptomatic cases? And so that really supports the effort that we may be walking around asymptomatic. It doesn't impact us as a younger, healthy generation or population as much as it does. And so if we bring them into a bubble, they test positive and they quarantine them for 14 days. Is it the same as a 14-day disabled list or load monitoring where, instead of having 14 games, particularly when you come to Denver, LA Clippers, and you sit out, is this the same thing? And then we're not running the risk of infecting the population, right? And so then it seems a little bit more plausible, right? That we centralize them, and it's better to have them in this bubble with other healthy people where we know that they're infected and they just stay in their rooms, as opposed to them walking around Oklahoma City or Houston or wherever. I don't know. Like I do think there maybe there's, like, to play the devil's advocate, maybe there's some credence to that.
Yeah, this whole idea that maybe the tests are just revealing that everybody has it and it's really not as bad. But then the other side of that, I don't know if I mentioned this to Rob, but I talked to somebody who was in New York City, and I think they're about my age, 50 years old. And the guy was a recreational athlete, and he got COVID, and he still has, I think back in April, and he still has respiratory issues, nervous system issues. His doctor has advised him not to do any intense exercise. What are the long-term implications? So if there are these people in the population that get it and it really messes them up, even though most people are symptomatic, I mean, where do we draw the line in terms of like restricting? And I'll get Ryan Banta jump in. You're in kind of a great part of the world where I'm sure it's controversial to talk about some of this stuff, but what's your take?
All right, well, I'm going to show you something real quick. How do I flip around my camera? All right, so this is where I'm at right now. See that? So Missouri is all bets are on. That's basically what I've been waiting to kind of show you guys that as you guys are on this thing. So I just got done being at, hold on, can you guys hear me at all?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's the pool cam. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so pool cam. Anyway,
I thought Keenan would have.
So basically, we just got done with going to Silver Dollar City, and they're only letting in like a very reduced amount of people, and they're trying to keep socially distanced, and they shut down a lot of the inherently dirty places like the pool, the ball pool where people jump in and little kids are running around and spreading all their boogers and snot and everything else. And they have us all wearing masks and things like that. But, with what's going on with the college athletics, that's the most troubling one, because it's hard to separate them from the students. I mean, they still have to go to school, where with professional sports, it's a little bit easier if you do bubble them. But the two places we're talking about bubbling, Arizona and Florida, cases have skyrocketed. Right? But some people are so cavalier they don't care, and then other people are overly so. And like you said, it's becoming a political issue. People are using politics as opposed to just common sense. And so what you just witnessed where I'm at, there's not a lot of common sense going on in terms of how we're interacting with elderly people and young people and everybody in between. I will say that if they can bubble the pros, it can be done, but they're going to have to use basically like a month before maybe they can even play, to know that everybody's clean and clear without any interaction. And you're not going to have any fans, because if you have fans, then the chances of somebody getting sick still goes back up, even if they're a great distance away and you've got a indoor sport like hockey or basketball where that air can be pushed around. And that seems to be a bigger problem than an open air sport like professional baseball or track and field.
Yeah, Rob, this idea of putting people in a bubble. Now, we know that if we kind of put people in one place, that could be, as soon as one person gets in there who's infected, now you can infect everybody really quickly because of that bubble situation. What do you think of those types of scenarios?
Yeah, I just think that, the more you test, the more positives you're going to have, right? Whether it's symptomatic or asymptomatic. So like in your case in Vancouver, I'd love to see the testing rate versus Florida. If Florida is testing a lot more than they are in Vancouver, you may be just as bad as Florida. You don't know it, right? And so I think the more you test, the higher your denominator. And there are camps out there. I'm not saying they're right or wrong. There are camps out there. In my discussions with people saying, look, if we tested the 300 million people in the United States, though one death is too much, maybe the death rate isn't any higher than the normal flu. There's camps that are thinking like that, right? That's why maybe people are more nonchalant about this. And there are other camps that say, no, this is, a severe disease entity that we really got to be careful with. And then you have everybody else in the middle, and I just think that, I know there are some Power 5 schools that, that are financially in a situation that they're renting hotels. You have certain dorm areas where they're only having, the food is brought in. And so with only 2 or 3 athletes, let's just say on a floor, maybe it's safer for them to be there than in the general public. This thing about, I personally don't see, sports happening for a while, as upsetting a statement that may be to some. And I'm a big pro advocate of sports. I miss it tremendously. I mean, the snowball going downhill is just the economics here, right? You have UCLA athletes there saying they want an independent entity to, I just saw on ESPN today, they want an independent entity to monitor this, because an independent entity doesn't have financial gains, right? For it. I'm sure with these TV contracts and everything else going on, there's got to be a minimum number of games to be played for schools to receive revenue. And how dependent are those schools on that revenue for survival? I mean, that's a $64,000 question. And so if you're gonna quarantine a team for 14 days with one positive test, I mean, if that happens twice during the season, you've missed 4 games, right? I mean, and then the team you've played against has to quarantine. So again, that snowball's rolling downhill. So I don't see a real positive outlook with regards to, restoring sports if you're going to shut it down, and it may be a valid right to shut it down. I'm not saying it's not, but if you're going to shut it down with every positive test, I mean, you're going to test people. The more you test, the more positives you're going to have, right? Just by the what's the word I'm looking for? The occurrence of testing. So I don't know. I'm not very positive on the outlook of returning to tests before a vaccine. And if you want to really get into a shit-stirring conversation, what if this vaccine mutates? I mean, what if this disease entity mutates? Then what's the prevalence of a vaccine?
Or what if the vaccine starts killing people?
Yeah.
That's an extreme,
yeah.
but
The thing, that is extreme. But right now, the answer is to come up with a vaccine, right? Because then you have a vaccine, essentially, you've decreased, the anxiety. Or at least come up with a, when someone gets the virus, a cure, right? So even if we don't have a vaccine, if we have a cure, once then someone gets the virus, But right now, if we're going to continually shut things down, which I'm not saying is right or wrong, right? It's probably valid. You're looking at NCAA right now, right? From LSU, someone just posted LSU. I wasn't aware LSU had 30 cases. From Alabama to LSU to Clemson, every week people are going to test positive. They're going to test positive because you're doing more testing, and then you continually shut this down. I'm just repeating myself now, which I
Yeah,
apologize.
like we
So
we had
I don't see it. I don't see it evolving because you have to keep shutting it down.
we had a conversation around just the use of, say, a mask, and you can talk about your personal experience with that. But I have a friend or a couple of friends who are in Taiwan, Hong Kong, Japan. They have very low number of cases, very few deaths, but they all wear masks and they're all very
Yeah.
careful about it. And they haven't shut down necessarily. So why can't we even just do that?
Well, my daughter's a physician's assistant. She treated COVID patients. She works at a hospital that specializes in orthopedics. Okay. And what that hospital did is they took the overflow from a hospital that were taking COVID patients in the time in New York where the numbers were out of the roof, right? And so if you look at the healthcare providers that are taking care of these patients, their numbers are much lower than the general population because the PPE works. The masks work essentially. I mean, you have to attribute it to that, right? So my daughter treated COVID patients for almost 2 months, and when she got an antibody test, she was negative. So it wasn't like she got it was asymptomatic, and she's 28 years old. So she is in that younger population. So I do believe, from those statistics, if you want to base things on stats and science, that the PPE or at least the masks work, right? In regards to not producing, saliva molecules from the person and then the other person not receiving them. So question is though, is it going to be like one of those high altitude masks? What's going to happen to the athletes who are wearing them? And there's just so much going on. There's just so much unknown. And, I wish I felt differently. I just don't have a positive outlook on it because, again, for probably the millionth time I'm repeating myself is we're going to shut everything down with a positive test. How are you going to gain traction and momentum? I don't see it. As Mike said, one person tested positive and a premier match was canceled today.
Yeah.
Why is that going to change?
Yeah, like in baseball, Sam, a couple of facilities just closed right up after, I think, a few tests. It wasn't like a huge number, but what's the feeling within baseball? We had Bob Alejo here, but he disappeared. But Sam, what are you hearing in terms of like, okay, what's the approach to this? If we have one positive, we're shutting everything down, or?
I don't fully know, to be honest. I hate to say that, but it's the truth. I get most of my info, like the little bits and pieces beyond what we get on the media. I get a little bit more, but otherwise, like, we get what people see is what's out there. I think the media said there wasn't a complete plan as well. So I think we're trying to figure it out as we go. It looks like the 2 New York teams have shifted their spring training 2.0 if or when it happens to New York away from Florida. I would assume more teams are probably going to do that as well, shift to wherever their home ballpark is instead of being in Florida or Arizona with the current rise. But just kind of take it one day at a time. I take from what we're seeing and go from there.
Yeah, and let's talk a bit about the university situation, because obviously, you guys have posted like 30 positives at LSU. We know similar numbers at other universities. So if I'm working at university, Carmen, I'll get you to jump in because one, you have experience in Division I NCAA, but also in Canadian. And in Canadian, I think the big problem is going to be people are just going to cut sports because the revenues are down from tuition, the revenues are down from international students, which is a huge one for I know a lot of Canadian universities, residents, food services, all of these things. And then I know that the federal government isn't subsidizing universities as much anymore. So what's going to happen when they go, well, where do we cut? Is it going to be sports?
Well, yeah. So far, well, no other schools have cut sports that I know of other than University of Lethbridge cut the men's and women's hockey program. But there won't be any U Sport championships in any of the fall sports. That has all been shut down. And Canada West is the only school that might do a couple sports, but for the most part, they're all shut down too. And but so far, the schools have just said they're closed up until, nothing's going to start until January the 1st. But then just this week, the athletic director at the University of Alberta, he's gone out and decided that even the winter sports, the ones that start in January, the ice hockey, the basketball, the volleyball, they're not going to happen either. Basically because the budget is so low that they just can't travel. So as far as he's concerned, they can just stay in Edmonton and play other club teams, but there's not going to be any competitive university sports at the University of Alberta, regardless of what the rest of the country does come January.
Yeah, because even at the university I worked at, when they had a change in local government, when they thought we're going to get less money, everybody in the athletic department was always like, oh, we're going to get less money. This is going to be horrible. Now, if you look at this situation, you're definitely getting less money. If not, we're going to get rid of some things. I just can't see how that's not going to happen if this persists. Anybody else want to jump on the university piece? Mark? And I guess one of the questions I have for people working at universities is, if you don't have, say they say, okay, we're not going to have football in the fall, do you still practice? Is that still acceptable to have people show up and just practice if you're not going to have competitions and have a season? Because I've heard that too, is like, well, we'll just practice until they let us play. Bob Alejo, what have you been seeing in terms of your position and how people are addressing this?
Well, can you hear me?
Yep, we got you.
Good, thank goodness. Well, hello everybody. I couldn't let you guys have all the fun in the world. I missed Rob. I saw Rob talking. His lips were moving, but I'm sure it was exquisite, so I didn't really need to hear the same old normal, absolutely correct shit he puts out every time.
You must know my wife.
No kidding. Well, my screen is limited right now. I see Keenan. Good to see you, brother. So, yeah, that's a good question. What they're going to do. I would say yes. For lots of reasons. I think if you can just practice, I think you should. It gets regularity, consistency, scheduling. These are the things that we're finding now through the mental health aspect is just horrific, right? And I wouldn't call it horrific for me, but yeah, we're all used to, getting our fix by being in front of people and joking and laughing and busting ass and coaching and all that. And right now, we're unable to do it. I would say, if we can get the kids back, then yeah, of course, I think we should train if we can for, health purposes, for mental health purposes.
Do you think they'll even have people on campus? Like, again, we don't know. Every week is different. Every month is different. But is there going to be? Because I know obviously there's universities that are saying, okay, you're coming back this week, and then some of the clients I have, well, they said it's going to be the end of June, and now it's going to be the end of July, and it just keeps rolling back and rolling back. But at some point, if say classes aren't in session, but they have online, do you still bring these people, the athletes, back?
Well, I know in the CSU system, it's where I'm from, that it's on. The majority of classes are online. And of course, when these people are sending out messaging, they're realizing now they have to be very careful. Some of it has to be very careful for legal reasons, right? You can't make somebody come back and say, you can't have your scholarship, or, you can't, we're not giving you credit for this course if you don't show up, because you're going to get sued, So most of the classes being online, that comes from Derek, like nursing, for instance. So you can't do nursing online. So that's where the exception comes in. Basically what they're saying is, if you can work from home, keep working from home. If there's classes that you can take at home, then you should take those classes at home. And that's why, at least at our school, they're doing that. But, I also noticed that, I was talking to an athletic trainer who's working in North Carolina, which I think recently has been designated as a hot spot. On Monday, their next phase is no masks. So now this place is elevating, right? the policy says no masks. Now what do you do? I mean, I know what I'm going to do. I mean, I'm the one in charge of delivering that message to the president, not my own personal message, but with the sports medicine, the doctors above. And, you know, you've got to, you know, now I'm hearing, hey, man, once they come back to campus, everything changes, right? So, you know, our policies easily amended to that. But I would say, you know, like campus is saying, you know, they care about everybody. So when you say, hey, athletes, you need to come back, if you got the right institution, and I believe we do, you're not looking at student athletes, you're looking at students. What's the overall risk of bringing students back? And of course, you're talking about us in California, right? So we got tons of layers going on here. Still, you're still looking at city and county. So right now, I think Berkeley, the city of Berkeley is prohibiting Cal coming back. Everything else has been okayed up to that point. Here locally, both the Galaxy and the Lakers are practicing, but 25 miles just north of that for us, they won't allow us to do it. And that's the other thing we're seeing. I think you probably already discussed this, that now we're seeing that the science is getting overridden many times by politics, finances, personal preferences, you know. So I think our campus is going to be, and I'm in full support of it. And if it doesn't look healthy, why bother? You know, I mean, we're looking already at Houston wiped out their whole program, and it wasn't kids that happened in every incident. So I have the inside dope on that, but all I can tell you is that their procedures just weren't great. And so they're going to go back all the way back to the beginning. Now, fortunately, we're not seeing, I think Houston was the first example of a practices being held and then kids being infected. Prior to that, it was all intake stuff where you can kind of say, okay, now let's go back a little bit. But I mean, again, the risk of this thing is phenomenal. I'll leave with this. I mean, I'll stay on, of course, but when Elliot Schwartz, who's been a long-time physician for the Warriors, the Raiders, and the A's, he was saying, you know, because he's from New York and he knows Fauci. He said, you know, I see my dear friend Anthony Fauci on. I was calling him about something else. So I hear dear friend Anthony Fauci talking about finding a vaccine in the next 6 months. He said, Bob, you realize we've been trying to get a vaccine for HIV for 50 years. So I go, ooh.
Wow. I don't know how to follow that, but this idea of like, okay, I don't even know if you can say you can require athletes to come back, because you just say, okay,
No.
we're having, right? And then you're not going to go as far as like, we're going to get you to sign a waiver if you attend my event, and you can't sue us if you get COVID. I can't even believe that's a thing. But yeah, I mean, it's just such a weird situation now where we're going to have practice, and I assume everybody who wants to make the team or be a starter or get playing time is going to come back for that reason. But like you said, from a liability point of view, I mean, are people talking to lawyers about this stuff right now? And is that a discussion that's being had?
Yeah. We brought campus counsel in a few times. I was on the Big Rest Conference sports medicine call, and the doctors had also ran some ideas past their counsel too, in just particular areas. But look, I mean, we've already been, you know, I've been on a conference call within the campus health and safety, environmental health and safety, and they're saying there's a couple issues. One, we have collective bargaining agreements in some of our areas, and some of our coaches are listed as faculty. So, you know, they've never really made the transition of athletics in campus. They just kind of put it under and tried to mend it. And we've made some huge strides just in the last year, but I mean, it's almost not even a dent. But there's instances, the CBA, it's not unlikely, in talking to a lawyer about this, that the CBA is going to call a cotton swab in your nose invasive. And they're going to allow you to have the option of saying no.
Yeah, no, that's it can get messy. Even the stuff with the NBA right now in terms of like, hey, we're going to come back, and players are like, I don't know if I want to come back. And it may not even be for the safety issue. It might be like, I don't want to be away from my family, or, you know, quarantine for 14 or 30 days before we actually play. It's a quality of life issue. Adrian, you were saying that Ohio State made players sign waivers? I didn't hear that.
Yeah, they did. I can't remember exactly who else did it, but I know Ohio State did. And my roommate, who is actually, I think I told you guys, he interviewed for NFL himself. So he gets like the insider himself a lot. It wasn't just Ohio State. I know it was a lot of couple of other universities. You know, I guess you could say to quote unquote protect themselves just in case someone's got COVID. Let's be honest. Like if I just trained a kid who's probably going to transfer to West Virginia next year, and I think he's got buddies there obviously, and he said that Dwayne Haskins and Saquon Barkley and someone else was there training. He said because they can't train at their respective facilities. But I mean, you know as well as I do, and I think I told Sam this too. Is like how many times have we, guys going to be there? It's like, hey, meet at such and such a park. Let's train. Meet at, let's, because I know like Michigan State just went back. Keenan, correct me if I'm wrong, but U of M just went back, I think a few days ago. But I mean, as far as signing waivers, I'm not 100% sure, but.
Yeah, I did not know that was happening. Keenan, have you heard anything about what's happening with some of these schools or organizations?
Yeah, and I can't speak to exactly the specificities of football. Bob would probably be better at that. I know they're putting priority on football, and that's where the NC2A system's kind of like they're losing the forest through the trees, right? Like I keep saying, like these non-risk sports, a lot of the Olympic sports, tennis, cross country, swimming, I mean even volleyball to a certain extent, basketball to a certain extent, they could bring them back in a whole safer manner, and it wouldn't really impact. Now, but football. So Michigan, from my understanding, brought football back, but they're going through phases of all the other sports, and so they're phase 3 sports. So unlike us at the Olympic Training Center, we're like combat and acrobat sports. They're the last to get back onto the campus because you don't need to be a doctor to realize like if you drool and spit all over somebody, like infectious disease is part of those sports, So we put them as phase 4 to kind of minimize a potential outbreak, whereas a place like Michigan has put them at the top priority. It seems like potentially, I know Florida State has let their football program back, but not their pool, their swimming team, even though their swimming team's outside. I can't speak to everybody, and I think it's Bob. You would speak to this better. I think it's conference dictated and state dictated. So I think the ACC's just letting football back, and that's it. And maybe that's
Well, I mean, football is going to come back because of the money, So we don't have that, right? I mean, I was the one that started the conversation and confirmed. I said, I want our fall sports back. Not in a hurry for basketball. We got to trickle back too, right? Because now you can't have that giant intake of athletes into the athletic training center because you got spacing and all that. So that's going to take a long time too. So you can't bring them all back as a team. You can only have so many in at a time. But football, yeah, I mean, even some of these big schools that have really successful fall programs, they're not even allowing those kids back to the absolute report date, which is mid-August, because they want football back. I don't know if you mentioned or not, but when I was cutting off talking about baseball, the whole waiver thing. So a couple things. One, as you know, because Keenan's been there, the weather in North Carolina is pretty damn good at certain times of the year. So Brown University comes out for a big track meet that we have, the what is it, Wolfpack Invitational, whatever. And I just, we never had a school come back like that. And so I asked our council, we need to find out, fill out a waiver. And he said, well, first of all, those really don't mean much, because, and I'm sure if somebody comes down with COVID under you got the right lawyer and all that, you're not going to lose. I mean, does anybody lose a lawsuit anymore? I mean, for crying out loud, right? But they said, and I think this is part of the COVID discussion that some campuses have, waiver, no waiver, is that there is there's already an inferred level of risk, right? And one of the guys said, to Keenan's thing is like, I don't have my water polo team fill out a waiver. That would be foolish because there is some sort of inherent risk that something may happen. I mean, who knows, right? So I think the voluntary thing is important. We have that all throughout our document. And that's not just because of kids, because like I think I said last time we were talking about this, when I was a kid, the last thing I wanted to do when I was in college was go home, right? So right now, these kids are probably at home like, oh my God, when do we go back? But think about parents. Parents could be the ones that say, hey, I don't want my child to come back. And that's when you get into the idea of, is it can't take a scholarship away for that, can you? I mean, I think that's a lawsuit. You can't really, those sort of things. Those sort of things happen. I mean, so I think voluntary is important. Baseball, I say, I know a lot of people don't realize this, but baseball players, the majority of them don't get paid till April 1st when they first come to the ballpark during the season. So, I mean, they're probably ironing that issue out, saying that, hey, I came back because you're telling me I can't get paid, or my livelihood's at stake unless I come back. I came back and I got sick. So I think there's a lot of avenues there. In fact, I was just thinking about, we have a water polo team, not a swim team, but Keenan, and I've not looked at it again, what's the idea of virus in water? I mean,
yeah, I mean, I think it's like everything else, right? They say it doesn't, because most viruses don't transmit well through chlorine or through water,
okay.
but viruses weren't supposed to live well in warm weather. So we all were supposed to go to Las Vegas and Arizona, and that didn't seem to work out too well, right? So that's his fault, right? This is a disease that the most brilliant physicians in the world can't understand yet. So
yeah, like is it as simple as like just add an extra cap full of chlorine into the pool and like everybody's blonde? Like, how does that work? Like, has there been discussion around even the chemical side of it?
No.
Okay, I'm just curious.
Yeah, that's kind of like if one is good, then five is better in our world, right? Like in the strength world, right?
Oh yeah. God, the American way.
You mentioned, or maybe Bob, you mentioned it, and I was Scott Caulfield. Some of you guys may know that he's the former education director at the NSCA, and now he's the head at Colorado College, which is one of those interesting American institutions where they have 2 Division I sports, and the rest are all Division III. And he and I have been working out 3 times a week for the past couple of weeks, and we're both saying, the biggest fear is what Bob said. We've got 18 to 21-year-old kids that have been living with mom and dad for the last 2 to 3 months. As soon as they get back on the college campus, they're going to rage. And so beyond COVID-19, the other standard diseases, infectious diseases that we have to deal with on a year-to-year basis by kids coming back. But and we can't police that. We can't blame them, right? They've been locked up. They haven't seen another gender, or, they haven't seen anybody for a while. They're gonna have fun.
Yeah, and I think Sam brought up the point, like, would universities just bring back student athletes as maybe a first step to see, like, okay, we have them on campus? And
would a parent really be up in arms if they said, we're going to provide online classes for your general student? I mean, I would, as a parent, I'd be like, that's fine. I'll keep them home. And if the entire football team and basketball team gets COVID-19, then I feel like a good parent. And if they don't, then I'll know I can send them back, at that second quarter session that they're talking about in early January.
Yeah, that's a good point. If somebody is the parent of a non-student athlete, and do they feel, I mean, Rob brought this up too, like, are they paying the same tuition? Are they paying, are they getting the same level of service? Rob, what do you think about that? Especially, I was, looking at this guy's, he's an NYU professor, and he's talking about how basically, it's too expensive now. Like, they've marked up the price of education, but they haven't changed the quality of it. I mean, are people thinking that now, like, what, I'm paying $50,000 a year to do Zoom calls?
Well, my other daughter went to NYU, and it's probably closer to 80 right now. So, yeah. So, yeah. I mean, no, they're going to say the tuition is the tuition, I assume. The question I had, I put up, and just, the state schools are funded, by the government, quote unquote. Private schools, then they don't get government funding, so to speak, I don't think. And so if enrollments are down, or if the states are struggling, I mean, is there a difference in state schools versus private schools and requirements and, policies, whatever it may be? I wouldn't think so, but who knows? I don't know. I'm going to assume, what they say about assume, that tuition is the tuition, and that's what we're going to do. You're paying for an education. Where they're going to lose money is on, cafeteria services, parking fees, those types of things, attendance to athletic events, going to the bookstore and buying paraphernalia, things like that. That's where they're gonna lose their money. I would assume that tuition is a tuition. You're paying for an education.
Yeah, I think one of the
I went
points
to a
is
small. I could say I went to a small school upstate New York, and I got something a couple of weeks ago saying that there will be face-to-face classes. That obviously can change, but school that usually starts the last week of August is not starting till October 15th. So I don't know.
well, the NYU prof who was talking about this said that, obviously the NYUs, the Harvards, the Stanfords, they'll still have demand, whereas
Yeah.
maybe some of the smaller schools won't. So they'll be like, forget it. I'm gonna become a plumber. I'm not gonna go to this school and pay this much money. Like, I'm serious. Like,
Well, the other difference between NYU and Harvard is that they don't have Power 5 TV contracts to survive. If there's no sports, they got big endowments, and I know, I forget who it was. Someone put up Brown before. They have a $4 billion endowment, but they cut track. I think the concern with the endowments is the volatility with the stock market. I can't believe the market is as high as it is right now. But what if that market goes to 10,000? What happened to your endowment then? I think that's the fear with regards to saying, we got a $4 billion endowment. We can keep track. No one knows the volatility of the economy right now. To me, it doesn't make sense with everything going on and the employment so high, unemployment so high, yet the market is still at 25, 26,000 and at times 27,000. Doesn't make sense to me. I'm happy that it is, but
Yeah.
who knows,
yeah, Eric Kozlowski, you're in a specific situation where you work at one of the academies, and I had a talk with Coach McGettigan there, and obviously he's in a high risk area, and we were talking about return to sport. But I said to him, I would think that the academies have a little more control over what the cadets do and where they go, and they're not going to be going to like a pool party in the Ozarks or whatever. But do you think that's the case, that you guys have a little bit more control over how, what the athletes are doing, and you can keep them in check a little more?
We're concerned. I'm concerned that, is it right that we have a football season this year? That's, I work alongside with Matt McGettigan. It's a scary situation. You talk about a bubble. We bring 4,000 cadets up there. We sent them home in mid-March, but just before this, we had a huge outbreak of the H1N1 or the norovirus, and it would decimate. It would go through the whole offensive line, and this recovery time at least was shorter, where they might just miss 2 or 3 days. But any of these viral illnesses just run rampant through our population. They're so close up there. You get them in football meeting rooms, out of practice. We can talk about how to mitigate it, hand wash and all that stuff, and it just goes all through us. And I think this bug is scary from how easily it's transmittable.
Yeah, and regardless of fatality rates and all that, if they get sick, they get sick, and that's just going to suspend a lot of things. There's going to be a lot of lost time. And would you say that outside of football, they're in scenarios where they're in close quarters for their regular schooling, more so than maybe other, like I know that Matt was telling me, like, they have to do physical education and combat training and hand-to-hand combat, and they have to, so that won't necessarily happen to somebody going to UCLA as a football player taking an arts degree.
Yeah, I agree with you on that one. Right now, they're bringing kids back and preparing to bring we call them the basics, our freshmen in for basic training. And they're going to arrive, usually they arrive on one day. We spread out to 3 days to try to alleviate that mass congestion. And they're going to do their best up there with the new kids and their cadre to keep them in smaller pods of 30. And that way, if that group gets sick, maybe the other group doesn't get sick. So they're really changing how they're doing basic training. And even there's summer classrooms. There's some that are online, and there's some in-house. So like our P department will open classes. They're going to have 300 online students, and there'll be 300 that can come and actually do classes on face-to-face. I'm not exactly sure what classes are, but it's a scary situation for us. And we're no no different than anybody else. We're going to bring back our football team and the 2 basketball teams first at the end of the month. And now, I don't know if many of you know, but we're going to carry probably 220 people on our football team. It's outrageous. So we'll bring in 80 freshmen, and right now there's 150. Expect some to drop over the summer before they get back, but we're expecting 140 football players to be back on campus June 29th. They'll all get tested, and they'll be put on a 14-day, we're calling a restriction of movement, where they have to stay in the dorm area, and they're really not supposed to leave their rooms until they receive a negative test. After that, we have phased plans throughout the rest of the summer, trying to get them back to full competition on August 2nd. But our football coach knows we're not going to allow any 7-on-7 drills or ball handling drills for a triple option school, any walkthrough type things that the other NCAA schools can do on the 23rd. And in fact, our first phase, it's one person lifting, no spotters. People are going to be 10 feet apart with masks in the building. And the government's limiting the rooms to 30 per room. So that includes, strength coach, any medical staff, me as an AT, and however many athletes can rotate through. So we're going to have a few more sessions as we start training them.
And even as handling injuries and in the athletic training room. And I mean, your days are long as it is. Now with this, if you have to have smaller groups and more rotations, I mean, how's that going to look?
We don't know. That's my, that's a concern that's down the road, but I don't know. As we've all said, life has changed. And, I've worked with wrestling teams before and football teams. So I'm always aware of trying to keep my hands clean, not touch my face and things. But I can't tell you how many times I'm taping a kid's hands or ankle, and I can feel them breathing on my face. And I've got to tell them, please turn your head. And they're not doing it maliciously. They're just the proximity that we're in. So it's scary. I don't know what we're going to do. Right now it's going to be, until at least August, we're saying no recovery in the training room, so they can't use our pools, cold tubs, and we were doing a lot of neat recovery stuff for the kids, and it's going to be real injuries only. So I think these guys that come in is like, hey, can you needle my hamstring a little bit tight? Those guys may not get the treatment they're used to, and that doesn't make us happy. But we've got to protect ourselves and really manage the kids that are really injured. And we don't even know when we're going to be allowed to use the locker room. I mean, they're using the locker room just to pick up clean gear, and we're asking them to shower up on the hill. That's the athletic act where their dorms are. We're asking them to shower up there and no congregating in the locker room until at least August 2nd. And I don't think any of these restrictions are really going to lighten up this season. I just don't know how we can have athletics, and how we can, with a good conscience, have athletics, knowing how even not necessarily dangerous it is, but kids are going to get sick. And we met with 3.5 hours about this on yesterday morning with our football coach, and he's concerned if one quarterback gets it, they're in a meeting room, their exposure in our area, an exposure is going to be 15 cumulative minutes within 6 feet, with or without a mask. You can't, if you're practicing, you're exposed. So whoever's within that 6 feet bubble is going to have to sit out for 14 days until we know that they're not positive. And I think I said on the side there, we're testing when they come back, and testing on day 14, at which time they have to sit out another 72 hours, probably until they get the negative result back. But we won't test anybody unless they're positive with symptoms or symptomatic. And it sounds like right now the Mountain West Conference, they're knocking it around, but as of last week, they're thinking about making mandatory testing once a week.
Wow.
And think of a football team, whether it's our size, and that means you test all of staff, everybody involved with them, every player, staff, everyone that's around them is going to have to get a test. And that's going to knock a day of practice out.
Yeah, that's at least 350 people, at least, right?
Yeah.
Here's something to think about. Can you hear me, Derek?
Yeah. Thank you, Eric, for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, Eric. So I had a question for you now. I can't remember what it was. But anyway, I think I'll remember it. Here's what we're not considering, right? I was talking to Mike Blasco's up at Cal. Those guys are going to, with their staff, or we're planning to, they'll go dark to dark every day because the groups are so small, right? I mean, and so what we're going to miss there is, now we go back to the old, okay, what about immune? Well, you're going to have strength coaches in that room there all day long, and they're going to get right up the crack of dawn again. It ain't going to be too long until their immune system gets shot down a little bit because they're not getting sleep. And when they're going to go eat? All these other things that, that I had to factor in. And frankly, I think, again, going back to the liability piece, which I'm sure Rob has gone through, and now I'm starting to I'm getting a huge, imposed epiphany on me, like, shoot, man, how's that all going to work out? And for me, it's like, well, nobody cares if you have the money, the time, or the staff to provide a level of healthcare. Because what they're going to say is, well, what is your reason why you had these, you practiced for a month and then everybody got sick? Just generally, I'm just saying, well, we just didn't have enough people, or we didn't have enough money to test and all that. They're not going to care. They're going to say, well, then you shouldn't have done it, which is the same thing that we have found in other areas before the COVID, right? Well, our trainers can't be at every practice. Okay, well, that doesn't stop you from having to provide, the best practices and minimal effective healthcare. That's going to be an issue, for sure. And in terms of how long this thing all goes, I think if you're going along 14 days and everybody's practicing well, at least in our policy and most of the ones that I've read, then that's going to enable you to shorten the groups, to combine a few groups, because you're kind of essentially already self-quarantined, right? You're there, it's only you guys, and then you move to the next thing. But I think the answer to the question is, I think you brought it up earlier, what about if your roommate's not a student athlete? What if you're living at home? And what we're telling these kids, because we're finding this out, is those people got to be on the same rules that you are. Well, mom and dad, they can't go to New York for a vacation for a weekend and come back home, because now you're at risk. So all this has to be in play. And then, of course, the onus is on these kids. So we just talked about kids going off campus. I already know for a fact that one of these schools that we've seen had a big party on campus. They didn't leave campus. But what happened was kids from off campus came in. They tracked it. It was kids that weren't athletes. Then they tracked it back to a bar in town, and then blah, 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 blah. So they don't necessarily have to leave campus either.
Yeah, and one thing we've talked about is our, the adults are the ones that are getting out of the bubble. The kids are mostly staying on base, but it's the coaches, the ATs, and the strength staff that go home every night that might have to stop by the grocery store that might bring something back.
No doubt.
A concern of ours is if, what happens if the 5 football ATs get a positive hit or have to go quarantine?
Yeah, now you're not going to have the staff, right?
Situation.
Well, talking about staff, I'll throw out some other collateral damage, guys. And I don't know how this is going to end up, but I give you a heads up that you better be aware of this. If you're a head coach, if you're a department head, if you're an AD, whatever it may be. So in mid-April, at the peak of this thing in New York, our business was at 25% capacity, okay? 2 months later, we're about 50% capacity. However, we are not at 50% staff. And we record our outcomes, and our outcomes haven't changed a bit. So the $64,000 question is going through this process, and we'll see when we cross the finish line, when we're back at 100%, did we need 100% staff? Were we overstaffed all along? Because we've had people furloughed, and we gradually bring people back, and we go through these processes, we come up with these formulas. How do you ensure good care? How do you ensure just maintaining people with a population that you want to provide the services you provide? And how do you bring how do you bring your staff back economically, right? Because revenue is not coming in. Well, as you go through this process, whether you had 7 ATCs on your staff, is your AD going to say you only need 6? Because we were able to manage this with 6. You only need 4 strength coaches instead of 5, because we manage. People are going to be looking at the economics of this. Don't think they're not as you go through this. And I'm just giving everybody a heads up. You better document and justify your needs, because I guarantee you there are going to be situations people come back and say, you did this with less, so why do you continue to request more? And just give me it could be collateral damage from this situation. Now, where we wind up in the end, we may be appropriately been staffed at 100% when we get back to 100%. But right now, it's a question that's being raised.
Yeah, there's essentially everything has changed, and it's not going to go back to the way it was, right? I mean, do you guys feel like, Keenan, what do you think about what Rob said and what Eric said and what Bob has said? Like, it's going to look way different for at least the next 5 years.
Well, I mean, I don't know about the next 5 years, right? Because we have the financial aspect, and then we have the kind of the medical aspect, right? As soon as the vaccine comes out, that's going to answer a lot of questions from the medical side. From the financial side, I don't know how much it's going to change, because I'm shocked. I'm really shocked at how big just one potential football season, loss of one football season, is going to impact every university now. Like, where, like, did they not have any savings? Like, what's going on? What I do hope, and I've said this before, what I do hope is it changes the landscape in terms of the unnecessary fluff in terms of college athletics, right? So I'll continue to use my favorite University of Michigan. We don't need to go to Rome to go 8-4. Doesn't need to happen. We don't need I don't need Central Michigan to go travel to LA to get their heads kicked in by USC. There's plenty of directional regional schools in that area that can play that, and so maybe that's how it changes. I still think, I know I've heard the conversations of, like, was it Alabama and that school down in Columbus, that truck stop school. They just signed a big deal to play like a home football series in 2027. Like, that's awesome because it sells out stadiums, Jerryville. Like, that's great for economics. But the fluff is what I hope changes in sports.
Yeah, is there a bit of a trimming of the herd in that regard? And do people rethink where they spend the money and just what they emphasize?
Just take our own industry for an example, right? Like, every 3 years, a football coaching staff gets fired, and along with them is the strength staff. And the strength staff comes in and they need another $25,000 to $50,000 bare minimum to get their equipment to train.
Oh, yeah, sometimes it's millions.
Right, it's millions, right? And then 3 years later, they don't win again. So they bring the whole staff in and stuff like that. Like, one or two things changes, right? Where universities go out and they identify the best coaches in the industry, and they understand these people, they may have been working baseball for the last 8 to 10 years of their career, or 5 to 6 years, but they understand it's human bodies and we're trying to make them resilient, robust, and if we can, we'll make them a little bit better in the sport discipline. And so those people stay there for 10 years. So you're not repaying that whole contract out. And I think, like, sadly, whatever happened. But Chris Doyle is going to be one of the best examples, right? I think all of us thought Chris Doyle was stand-up individual. Never would have guessed in a million years that he would have done that. But I keep looking around and I'm wondering where Bob Sanders is, where Abdul Hodge is, some of the most prominent black football players that have come through those doors. They're not saying boo. So got to believe that that's, there's some smoke to that, right? So they just had to pay him out, and so I just think those are the things that I mean, like the fluff, right? And we see it more, I think, in maybe basketball. I don't know, you guys would know that, like, Derek, you would know more, like, you would know in football, right? We still got guys like that claim themselves to be Dr. Feet because they're the agility, speed gurus in the world, and universities will pay them because they see that they're working out Antonio Brown. And those are the things that I hope become more credible. And I hope they audit. And I'm not just talking about our profession or even ATCs. I think everybody that's involved in the athletic department, there's an audit. I mean, there are dinosaurs there that have just been hiding behind their desk. They've just been biding their time. Like, audit these people. Audit them.
Yeah, is it Mark Dillon? Is it worth $800,000 a year to pay a strength coach I don't even know. I don't even know what the value is in the industry anymore, especially if there is that risk that, hey, you've given this guy so much power, he feels like he's untouchable and he can say things. And again, we weren't there. I don't know what happened, but I'm sure other people have stories. But Mark, what's your take on the college environment, and is it going to change? Is the reason why you haven't won more games is you don't have the logo on all the dumbbells? I have no idea.
Yeah, it's really tough to say. I mean, Chris Doyle's situation. I mean, obviously, you would like to think that helps the profession in general. Like the higher the salaries get, that the trickle down effect to other professionals and to other coaches in the profession. But with recent events, I mean, you kind of think there's going to have to be some changes. As far as is that worth it? Like I said, I think I'd like to think it's good overall for the profession, but then at the same time, you look at the fluidity of coaches, particularly on the football side, and every 2 to 3 years, 4 years, maybe if you're lucky, when coaching staff changes happen and strength and conditioning coaches are moving, and usually the next guy ends up getting paid more than the guy that was there previously. So I don't know where that ends, but a lot of that's going to depend on how much money that particular university has. But kind of going back to what's already been talked about, the previous university I was at, that's exactly what happened. New strength coach came in and literally $600,000 worth of new equipment, because apparently the 3-year-old powerlift equipment in the football weight room wasn't good enough to get it done with the athletes that were there. But so I really don't know. That's a hard to answer.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody else has any comments on that, but if like for every guy that's making, and there's not many guys making 800 grand a year, but for every person who's making over 500 grand a year as a strength coach, there's a guy making 30,000 as an assistant or whatever, right? So it's not like we're growing as an industry. It's just we have these.
Yeah, and that was going to be the other thing I hit on is, when I was at this university when this happened, I'm thinking to myself, like, where's all this money been when people have been kind of arguing about, hey, could I get a pay bump? Can I, in my particular situation, I was assisting football and worked with 5 other sports outside of football, but yet was the lowest paid strength coach on the football staff because I was from the previous staff. So those are definitely valid concerns.
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the curtain's being drawn back on a lot of things now, and it's hopefully things move forward with this. Mike Hurst, you're on the other side of the earth, and you're listening to this discussion, and you have a small group setting that you coach in, and obviously it looks very very cozy, and you guys are. What are you thinking when you're watching what these guys are talking about in terms of, like, we have 200 plus athletes, and we have them all in the locker room or on the field, and like, I mean, what are you trying to manage? And
it's mind blowing, those sorts of numbers. Can I just throw something else into the mix there, just slightly different? You would have read or heard about the discovery that apparently a very well known steroid that's been around for 50 years has had a really good effect on C19. Yeah. Are we going to see a rash of that in sports now, and saying, well, I'm doing it to save my life, and my doctor told me I need to take this stuff, and I did gain 20 kilos of muscle, but there you go. So that was just a thought. I mean,
here's a question
just to further complicate the whole scenario.
How many of your athletes have been tested for performance-enhancing drugs in the last 4 months?
None. Yeah. Not one.
Yeah.
And I think that's pretty common across the board. And I just think it's just open slather. It seems to be. I mean, but we're not a pro team, and we're not, my guys are just relay runners at the moment. They're still evolving, hopefully to a higher status. But it's a concern. It's a real concern. And I think there will be unscrupulous coaches and trainers out there that will take advantage of it. Not in the pro sports so much, but I mean, let's face it, track and field is still an amateur sport. even though they train like full-time athletes, for 99% of the population of the sport at a domestic level. Yeah.
Omar, you wanted to jump in.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on what I think it was Mark who was talking about with the strength conditioning stuff. I was a finalist for Cal men's basketball, so I applied for that strength conditioning position. And the dynamic there was so different in the sense of you don't get to meet with the coach until you're like top two candidates. Everything else has to go through the guy in charge of strength conditioning. You have ATC staff, you meet some administrators. So I believe that a lot of that, I've been at D2 for the last 16 years. So it was a little bit different for me to kind of go through that process. But I think a lot of the decision-making is probably going to be taken out of the hands of the strength coaches and more into, or the head coaches they're going to report to, which again puts a lot more stress on the strength and conditioning coaches in charge of fulfilling those or filling those spots. But that's just my thought.
Yeah, but all the premier head coaches going to say, if you want me, this is my guy.
Good question.
Yeah,
usually do. I mean, right? That's usually what happens is when those premier guys, they're going to bring in their staff no matter what. So, yeah, I don't know how that works. But I also, the thing that happened at Cal a couple of years ago, I mean, that had a lot to do with it as well. So I think I don't think it's cookie cutter. I think it's, to Rob's point, if, you're a premier coach and they went out and looked for you and you want that guy to win, then he's going to want his staff there because he's responsible for winning. So,
Adrian, you want to jump in?
Yeah, sorry about that. It's funny you guys were on the strength part. Prime example for myself, like Derek and you and I had quite a few conversations about this. Sam knows about this too. Sometime last year, it was I won't name the name of the school, but it was an NAIA school, and he's like, hey, you work with a lot of guys. The guys may be going Olympic trials, yada, yada, yada. I'm like, yeah. He said, listen, I would love to get you in the NCAA system. Well, it's NAIA. He said, this is what I can do. He said, I know you're strength and conditioning certified. He said, I can offer you $10,000 to come down for a season. I'm like, what? I'm like, you want me to move? Yeah, I'm dead serious. I'm like, you want me to move 5 hours away to come to your campus for $10,000? He said, well, I could probably throw in an extra $5,000. He said, because you could probably be the strength coach for the football, for the track team. I'm like, dog, what? No.
Then you should ask him, those are just the moving expenses.
Right. Now I'm like, what? And just it goes along with what Omar and everybody else is saying, and we put it in the chat too. It's like, okay, Keenan, you're a perfect example of this. I mean, you want me to get this master's, and I know you guys have gone through it too, and to volunteer for a semester or a season or whatever. No, and then you want me to go work, for $10,000, to be the lowest paid, just like one of the guys said, to be the lowest paid strength coach. But yet I'm dang near poverty. I'm eating noodles for a year just to try to get up in the industry. But yet you have a master's degree, and like, come on, no.
That's the NAIA, baby. I was there for about when we made the transition to D2. It was a big difference, but they don't call the NAIA the Wild Wild West for no reason, man.
So the worst is you go and get all that, and then you're told you're too qualified.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, I have a story about that. Honestly, I won't name the name of the school, but it was 2018. I was at like 3 guys going to Olympic trials. They're like, hey, listen, I heard you work with a bunch of NFL guys. I was like, yeah, because I was working with guys. One of the guys was the Falcons, a couple of the Lions, and one of the guys played Denver Broncos. And he's like, hey, we have a track team. We want you to start working with those guys. 30 seconds later, he's like, actually, you know what? You know more than our coach, and he's kind of under fire, and you know more than me too. So I don't think this is going to work out.
I don't know what to say. Obviously, there's a lot of problems out there, and maybe this is starting to create discussion around, like, are we spending money in the right place? Do we need these many people? I don't know. I'll let Rob and Bob and Keenan kind of gang up on this one, but what is the answer going forward? Is it just kind of like an iterative approach of week to week? We look at the numbers, we delay a bit more, Is anybody going to say like, no, just fucking close it all down. Let's just sit and wait for a bit until, everybody from the Ozark pool party passes away, and then we can kind of move on from that. I have no idea what's going to go on here, because I told my wife, I said, here's what's going to happen. You guys correct me if I'm wrong. We're going to have more people coming back testing, whether it's professional athletes, and where the numbers are going to keep going up, because if you test, you're going to see numbers. Great. So at what point is everybody going to kind of scale back and say, okay, everybody back into lockdown, we're not going to have sports? Or is a prominent coach going to succumb to this, or a prominent, maybe it's the equipment guy who's been there for 20 years or 30 years. I mean, there's a lot of ATCs in the NFL, when we're at the combine, Rob, there's a lot of older fellows that have been there for like 30 plus years, and they're sticking with the team. Are those guys at risk? And is somebody going to die before we go, wait a minute, this isn't worth it? Keenan, what's the cutoff point?
Why do you have to bring me up first?
You're the youngest.
I wanted to hear what the people that have been in the industry longer and that I respect so highly is their feedback. But I think three factors into whether we're going to be shut down, right? First and foremost will be governmental, right? So the governors of each particular state, and because that's what it's going to be. It's going to be governors. I don't see our president. I mean, right? He called out his own Dr. Fauci. Was it yesterday or Thursday, right? He was like, he's a great doctor, but he doesn't speak for the NFL. Blah, 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 don't kneel, right? Like, so that, boom, he's off the question. So it's going to be our governors, right? And they're going to be looking at trends and trying to keep their state safety. Number two will be the chancellors or the presidents of the university, right? Because they're overall, they're for the benefit and the well-being of each one of the regular students, right? And the faculty too. Everybody falls under their jurisdiction for the most part. And maybe 2B would be the athletic directors, potentially, but I think, athletic directors are answering to the presidents, and then they're answering to the business model, right? So they're going to keep trying to play that Jenga puzzle. I imagine. I don't know. Never been an athletic director. And then number three, like exactly what you said. Sadly, you look at all the we'll call them historical impacts of diseases or injuries that have caused landmark changes in collegiate sports and professional sports. Sickle cell, right? It didn't take one. It took a couple deaths before they're like, you know what? There's kind of something to this sickle cell trait. We have to make it mandatory. Concussion, pre-screening concussion, and then concussion management through that. We still haven't figured that out, but right, it took a couple, deaths or really bad long-term outcomes before we changed that. Cardiac screening, and we're still kind of, 50-50 whether or not we should screen everybody with an EKG and echo and its cost. So I do think it's going to take, sadly, some unfavorable instances before a major, like, we're shutting sports down or we're going to keep going.
Yeah. I mean, Eric, in your case, Eric Kozlowski, is it a Department of Defense issue, or is it by each academy or the administrator, the athletic director? How would that work?
Who knows? We've talked about that, and that's the exact question I brought up is, what is our threshold? I mean, one of the meetings we had with the other service academies is, we bring everybody back, we're likely to have 10% positives. So what's the threshold? 20, 30, 40 offensive line? I don't know, but the direct will probably come down for us from the DOD, and also what other sports are doing. I mean, once in March, when they shut everything down, we pulled everything back real quick and got our kids back home. And so I think we're in the same place, but I don't know when. I don't know if we're likely to even start the season. If we do, I don't believe that we'll finish it. I mean, we'd be lucky to get to October is just my gut feeling.
Yeah, I agree.
So I don't know if it's worth it.
It's going to change the whole definition of spring football.
Exactly, and that's been brought up too. It's like, why not just wait till February and try to play?
I'm curious from an AD's perspective, whether or not, what Eric just said about pushing all this. I understand like the chaos it would create, and some institutions probably can't necessarily maybe make it happen. But if you did push all this to February? What would that do? Or, I'm just curious from an
Bob.
AD perspective.
Bob, has that been discussed about just pushing everything back? Like football starts in February and basketball goes at the same time and track,
Sure. Oh yeah, baseball in particular. Soccer, before this even happened, men's soccer had something tabled that was going to split the season in two, end of the first semester, beginning of the second, because there's, they're playing Thursday, Saturday, the men, right? Like, we know about recovery and how, all that stuff. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, it's been talked about. Look, I mean, and I know you screwed me over by putting me after Rob, because that's like being a singer and then following Frank Sinatra. That's a joke. But if your school has football at the Power 5 and you don't have football this year, you're gonna feel that probably for about 10 years, probably 8 to 10 years. We're lucky that we don't have football and that we're not driven at all, especially by any sort of finance. Still, like was talked about earlier, not having anybody on campus, the whole thing is, yeah, tuition for sure, but you're talking about parking, you're talking about dorms. Well, that's a lot of money, man. That's a lot of money. And so that, we've already been asked to trim. First it was 20%, and I didn't know exactly, had to do a little Jeff Robodine, not from not equals not. How do you trim 20% out of, and then it wasn't but a couple of weeks later, they said, now you got to trim 1.4. And I said, I didn't even know we had $1.4 million, Now that was, I mean, I'm not the AD, but I'm in those calls. So we went back and did it. And to what everybody was kind of discussing, we're talking about taking off these out-of-state long trips, not flying when we don't have to fly, making sure that we're staying, getting the best bargain in a hotel, taking one less night to stay over when maybe we would have. We've already cut scholarships back. No sports, no salaries, no furloughs, which is, what our AD said, this is what we have to do. I don't want people to lose their jobs. In major college athletics or just Division I athletics, there's only two places to really get your money, and that's salaries and scholarships. And so you have to figure out where that goes. But we're, budgetarily, I mean, listen, the whole topic about, how we're going to arrange the season. I mean, these people are, I wouldn't say they don't have a choice. Of course we have a choice, but that's why you hear football's coming back, and we're not spending any money elsewhere. Those other teams will come back in August. We got to get them here now so we can start going.
Yeah, on some level, they have to almost bring things back, and then it's kind of an experiment. And then if, we get all these positives, okay, we pull them back, and then that allows for an easier decision around pushing things back, right? So,
yeah, well, major college football at most places funds about up from 90% up the entire athletic department. Absolutely 100%. So right away that, holy cow. And again, that funding isn't just, stadiums and all that. That's salaries, So I do think salary is going to be impacted. There will be no money to give to anybody. And everybody in the business that's sitting in any kind of coaches and senior staff meeting is hearing that, and we've already had even at our level, had to reiterate this is not an athletic department decision at all. This is not a CSUN decision at all. This is an economic decision that we have no control over. And if you still want to have your sport in your job, then you will do what is necessary, or honestly, we'll just do something else. And they're live conversations. I won't even talk about not getting paid when you're younger. I mean, we can talk about that another time.
Yeah. Rob, it's economics, Rob. In case you weren't listening.
It is. Don't kid yourself. It is.
But as part of that, okay, here's a question for you. Does that mean we're going to vet individuals better because we want to make sure we're paying them what they're worth? Or is it going to be like, hey, I'm going to protect my buddy, who's, my friend, and I'm going to keep him on staff, but I'm going to cut the other guy? Like, what's going to happen?
I don't know what's going to happen. I can tell you my perspective, and I don't want to be the grim reaper. I think that, like I said before, we need a vaccine or at least a cure, right? And if you test enough and you prove that this virus has a acceptable percentage of death, and I'm not saying even one death is acceptable. All I'm saying is people die from the flu every year. People die from car accidents every year. People die from, if you tested 300 plus million Americans and this wound up being a 0.01% death rate, then there may not be as much of a concern reporting back to athletics and then saying these populations, 18 to 22 versus 70 to 80-year-olds, who's at the most risk? And then hopefully, even if you get it, we have a cure. All those things together, I think, are going to evolve to the return to sport. I am convinced we're going to get through this. It's going to be different. When I started as a physical therapist, when you went to the operating room, there was a primary physician and a physician attending. Now there's a physician and a physician's assistant. When you were on a hospital floor and there were 10 physical therapists, there are now 5 physical therapists and 5 physical therapy assistants. SMU came back from the death penalty, right? We will evolve and we will get through this, however it winds up getting through this, but it's going to be different. Whether departments are affected with regards to numbers, more or less. Some people may say if we were better staffed or if we had additional equipment, we would have been better prepared for this COVID. And so going forward, that's what we need. So it's not always taking away. There may be some additions. However, that said, what Bob just said, if they go across and say, we gave every department AD, assistant AD, a 20% haircut, and it's going to take us 10 years to get through this, if Bob is right, unless some schools, I assume, are going to have boosters, but even the boosters, are they economically stressed because their investments didn't do well, right? Then for the next 10 years, is the standard salary at those positions going to be 20% less? But at least you have a job. And that's how you're going to survive going through this, right? So we will get through this. Sports will come back. Just, what's the timeline? No one knows. And what's it going to look like? Nobody knows. But what I'm saying, and I'm telling you, I'm giving you guys a heads up for whatever it's worth, and I hope I'm wrong, just justify your positions and justify your staff, because if you're successful, Bob, let me ask you in all sincerity, if they can't afford 5 scholarships, right? Because that's part of the cutting back to survive, and you guys win, are they just going to throw 5 scholarships back on the menu when things get back to normal? Or are they going to say, why do we need to have another 5 scholarships? That's money we could save. You guys won with 5 less scholarships. Why do you need them back? Those types of things are going to happen, guys. I'm just telling you.
No, you're right, Rob. And I'll tell you that I've had that conversation as an administrator too, not because we're getting rid of jobs, but just how do we save money? I mean, how about all these people who end up showing up to work because they don't like to be at home, they don't like their husband or wife or the kids, whatever, whatever, I don't know. And if it costs money to bring them to work, they're going to say, well, why would we do that? You can already go home, because, that's going to be a bitch that maybe those people, it's good or bad, right? That person, I've been trying to work from home forever, and now we just did for 6 months, and it was perfectly. So I'm telling you, you need to provide me the diversity to be able to work at home now, because I did my job. And to your point, we did cut back scholarships. We cut a good swath of scholarships up. We didn't take any away. Right. We're honoring, I think everybody's doing that up until the point. But yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you if you're saving money and trying to save jobs? I mean, that's absolutely, which we should be doing anyway. You should be, and I know you do it, and I'm in the process of gathering all that together too. Like, are we doing our job, and is our job being done?
So I'll throw this out there, just like the NBA, right? The NBA, I think, was this the first year, Bob, the second year, maybe, where they could advertise on their jerseys, right? That was right. For revenue. All right, so if you have an administrative building and everybody in that building can work from home, why wouldn't you sublease that building to a company that can assist the university and collect rent? Those are the things that may evolve that will help us survive that part of the change going forward. If you have, if your marketing department is out trying to get business, do they need to be in a building? Maybe marketing works from home forever, right? So these are the things that we'll survive, we'll get through this, but it's going to happen with change. You know, how many, we just said it before, how many coaches, what's coaching longevity at one school now versus 20, 30 years ago, right? It's just, everything's changed, but everybody's working, everybody's surviving. We'll get through this. It's just going to be different. But
Yeah,
we'll get through it.
here's what's going to happen. If you start the season and the football season can't be finished, we're all going to just switch to Madden and decide it on Madden. Esports. That's going to be the solution.
But if there's no sports, who's on the cover?
I'm telling you, yeah.
Well, I don't know if we've decided anything, but certainly I appreciate everybody's contribution here, and it's made me think. But it sounds like everybody agrees that it's going to come down to economics. You know, even.
Yeah, I think it is. And, you know, let's talk for a minute about those economics. And one of the things is, you remember when baseball's salaries got, you know, so high, they stopped giving 3 to 5 year contracts. Now they gave maybe the same yearly, but they cut back. And that's, I'm telling you, that's going to happen. There's a lot of administrators that are probably looking at the Doyle thing and saying, okay, you know, that happened, and now that's over with, right? But that's possible.
Yep.
But I mean, there's not going to be all that money to have. Like, there's only a pot, right? And so, you know, the market's going to get, you know, driven a little bit by that. So I don't, you know, I don't know how those salaries can keep climbing at these schools. I mean, we'll have football be the key. And, you know, football ends up having, and they end up getting people in there, then that may very well be the case. But look, baseball survived. They're back up now making whatever, right? And the other thing too is, if you look at, you know, I know Rob and I went through it. I don't know if Mike did, but Rob, do you remember going to getting those sugar cubes with the polio vaccine in it?
I still want to know how many people on this call, on this Zoom, know who Jethro Bodine is.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. That's true. Well, I mean, so we did that then, and, you know, polio was an instant killer, right? And now, granted, they did get a vaccine out of that, but the country didn't stop.
Yeah.
You just did your thing, right? Same with, you know, we get the flu, and, you know, we don't say, oh God, you know, there's going to be a bunch of people that could get infected by me, Babaleo, who's healthy, and I just have the flu. Nobody thinks about that. And so this whole thing that we've seen so far right now, up to this point, and I'm not, you know, I don't have a pipeline to all these people. They're not calling me, you know, hey, just want to get you updated. But there's been essentially no symptoms and no hospitalization for all those people that have tested positive. So then it's like, okay, they were asymptomatic. They all tested positive. Well, I mean, so what? So now, you know, at some point, perhaps somebody's going to have to make that hard, detailed discussion, and, you know, and sound callous. And like you're talking about, you know, one death is always too many.
Yeah.
But that hasn't stopped, you know, the flu. And by the way, in a lot of instances, older people, they get colds, and those go to pneumonia, and then they die from that. So, I mean, there's a lot of discussion that can be had around it.
And Bob, for clarity, I'm not saying that has to be the case. All I'm saying is we're going to have to establish what's acceptable, quote unquote. That's all I'm saying. Right?
Yeah, and that's what I'm saying the same thing too. Somebody's going to have to be the person to bring it up. That's a tough discussion, of course. But you know, we've survived plenty of, you know, illnesses over the years that have wiped across the country, and nothing's come to a halt like this is. And I know it's new and all that. So I'm just following what I hear so that we can get our kids back safely. But it's almost like, you know, you just kind of have to go out and take a whack at it. But the economical impact of this thing is going to be something you can't imagine, I think, really.
I agree. I think it's going to be all economics, as cold as that sounds, because people have the best intentions. People could have affinity to individuals and their institution and every one of their staff. But adjustments have to be made, because when expenses exceed revenue, you're out of business, and there is no institution, there is no team, there is no nothing. And so that's why it's about economics. You have to avoid expenses exceeding revenue to stay in business. And so, you know, again, that's why, unfortunately, it's about economics.
Yep. And I'm going to give Frank Sinatra the last word there, Bob. So
good. Good. I'm glad I didn't have to follow the guy. God,
thank you for jumping on, everyone. Very, very informative once again. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for the comments. Comments were great.
Yeah. Happy Father's Day.
To you all. See you, boys.
Take care.
Buzz.